November 24th, 1942. Field Marshal von Manstein is speeding towards the outskirts of Rostov from the Leningrad sector to take on the mission of rescuing the German troops who have just been surrounded in Stalingrad. The German units trapped in Stalingrad, numbering some 330,000 soldiers, were commanded by General Paulus, who had been ordered to hold out in the city until rescued. In total, there were some 22 divisions, divided into 5 army corps. At that time, Manstein was considered one of the best strategists in the German army. His greatest achievements had been the design of the plan to defeat France in 1940, his fleeting advance towards Leningrad, and the conquest of the city of Sevastopol. However, this new mission would be the most difficult of all those he had previously faced. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets unleashed Operation Uranus against Army Group B. They quickly penetrated the Romanian Third Army, holding the front on the Don River north of Stalingrad, and the next day they attacked and penetrated the German 4th Panzer Army and the Romanian 4th Army, holding the front south of Stalingrad. Their objective, which they achieved in just 4 days, was to cut off and isolate General Paulus's German 6th Army at Stalingrad. In doing so, they left a gaping hole in the German front in southern Russia. Manstein's mission was thus to halt enemy attacks, rescue the 6th Army, and re-establish the front between Army Group B in the north and Army Group A in the south. Based on assurances from Luftwaffe Commander Hermann Göring about his capabilities, Hitler had ordered the Luftwaffe to organize an airlift to deliver supplies to the Stalingrad pocket and told the 6th Army to dig in and await relief. However, Manstein knew that the 6th Army could not remain in Stalingrad as Hitler had hoped. For him, the only questions at this point were when an adequate relief force could be assembled to attack the pocket from the outside, and whether the airlift would allow the 6th Army to hold out until then. On the windswept steppe west of Stalingrad, the scene was one of panic and chaos. Soviet spearheads had swept away the rear administrative and supply services of the 6th Army. Manstein's train arrived at Novocherkassk shortly after midday on November 26th, and his new Army Group Dawn was declared operational the next day. The new Army Group included the German 6th Army and the Romanian 3rd Army, as well as the German 4th Panzer Army and the Romanian 4th Army, the latter two grouped together as Army Group Hoth under Colonel General Hermann Hoth. The next day, the German High Command informed Manstein of the reinforcements he would receive for the attack he had to carry out. These units were to be the 57th Panzer Corps with the 6th and 23rd Panzer Divisions and the 15th Luftwaffe Field Division, which would arrive in their sector by December 3rd. These reinforcements were to be deployed in the 3rd Romanian Army sector and were expected to be operational by December 5th. They were to be joined by other units already present in the area, which would be known as Hollett's Detachment or Army. Manstein believed that these units, which included 4 panzer divisions, 4 infantry and mountain divisions, and 3 Luftwaffe field divisions, might be sufficient to break through to the 6th Army, even taking into account that the Luftwaffe divisions were only suitable for defense. In any case, it was clear that everything would depend on these units arriving in their positions in time to be able to attack as soon as possible. On November 28th, Manstein sent a long teletype to Hitler in which he outlined his assessment of the situation and his intentions in some detail. Manstein knew that the best he could hope for was to reach the 6th Army and help it withdraw from Stalingrad and regain firm contact with Army Group A as it retreated from the Caucasus, and he said so. 2 days later, Hitler called Manstein in the middle of the night. "I cannot accept your proposals, Mr. Marshal," Hitler said. "The 6th Army is entrenched on my orders and will defend this fortress. I want different proposals from you." "Mein Führer, put Army Group A under my command and give me operational freedom for both army groups," Manstein replied. "That is not possible," the German leader replied. "Mein Führer, please tell me what Army Group A is supposed to be doing in the Caucasus." "It is a question of the possession of Baku." "Unless we get the oil from Baku, the war is lost," Hitler remarked. "If I can no longer get you the oil for your operations, Mr. Marshal, you will be unable to do anything. In a motorized war, everything depends on oil," Hitler concluded. "Mein Führer," Manstein interrupted, "put the whole of Army Group A under my command and give me operational freedom, and I will give you a decisive battle in southern Russia, after which you can get your oil wherever you want." Finally, Hitler ended the conversation by denying Manstein his requests. On December 1st, Manstein published his plan for the relief attack. It called for the 57th Panzer Corps to attack northeast from Kotelnikovo across the steppe to Stalingrad, and for the 48th Panzer Corps to attack from its bridgehead over the Don River near Nizhny Chirskaya eastward to the pocket. Although Nizhny Chirskaya was about 50 kilometers closer to the pocket, Manstein knew that the Russians were aware of the importance of the bridgehead and were building up forces against it, so he hoped to gain some surprise by launching his attack from further south. When the advance of the 57th Panzer Corps reached the height of the bridgehead, the 48th Panzer Corps would join the attack. He hoped to begin the attack on December 8th. Meanwhile, inside the Stalingrad encirclement, the hardships for the German troops continued to increase. Food and ammunition rations were reduced every day, and the number of soldiers falling ill began to increase as well. Overall, the Luftwaffe managed to deliver an average of only 58.3 tons of supplies per day, a little more than 10% of the minimum daily requirements. During the first week of December, reinforcements began to trickle in. Army Group Hollet received the 336th Infantry Division, which began to occupy positions along the lower Chir, and the Luftwaffe's 7th Field Division. Days later, on December 7th, the 11th Panzer Division joined. This unit spent the next week as a fire brigade, trying to contain the pressure the Soviets were exerting towards the sector near the town of Oblivskaya. During these actions, it destroyed more than 130 enemy tanks. The main airfields used for the airlift to Stalingrad were located behind the lower Chir. Therefore, any Soviet penetration of the Chir threatened the supply effort and had to be eliminated. For this reason, it seemed increasingly unlikely that the 48th Panzer Corps would be able to break free from the Chir front and take part in the rescue attack, so that it would ultimately be General Kirchner's 57th Panzer Corps that would take part in the mission. On the other hand, the 6th Panzer Division had reached Kotelnikovo in time, but had been forced to fight against the enemy units established there. As for the Luftwaffe's 15th Field Division, it was still forming in the Salsk area. Manstein had no choice. He could not start the rescue attack on December 8th with the weakened units he had. Manstein was in a race against death, and he knew it. First, he had to watch his northern flank. He knew that any repetition of the Soviet Uranus-type attack on his tenuous northern flank could very quickly turn into a catastrophe for both Army Group Don and Army Group A to the south, but that did not seem imminent. At this point, he had to hold the 6th Army in Stalingrad by means of an airlift, which had so far failed to meet the minimum requirements, and at the same time build up a relief force strong enough to relieve the encircled troops. Fortunately for the Germans, Stalin had a similar problem. While Manstein had to free up the 6th Army in order to have troops to prevent Army Group Don and Army Group A from being cut off, Stalin had to eliminate the 6th Army in order to free up enough of his own troops to attack and cut off the German army groups. Finally, Manstein received some good news amidst the despair and pessimism. The 6th Panzer Division had achieved a stunning victory. In a 2-day battle north of Kotelnikovo, the German division destroyed 2 Soviet divisions and a tank brigade. Good news was also coming from inside Stalingrad. Soviet pressure was easing day by day. In addition, the 57th Panzer Corps in Kotelnikovo notified that it was ready to attack. In the end, the 2 most important units to take part in the rescue attempt were the 23rd Panzer Division, with about 100 tanks, and the 6th Panzer Division. The remnants of the Romanian 5th and 8th Cavalry Divisions were ready to cover the right flank of the German Panzer Divisions. The distance from the Mishkova sector, the starting point of the operation, to the isolated troops was approximately 90 kilometers. At dawn on December 12th, German artillery opened fire on Soviet positions in the Kotelnikovo sector. The 6th Panzer Division then launched an attack. At the same time, the 23rd Panzer Division attacked in a northeasterly direction towards Piemoncherny. At 9:50 a.m., with Piemoncherny in hand, the 23rd Panzer Division continued its advance, attacking Nebikov and Koshara. The 6th Panzer Division's advance was so rapid that it overran enemy artillery positions before they could begin firing or move out of harm's way. By mid-morning, its tanks had overrun the hastily abandoned enemy headquarters, crippling Soviet control of operations. Soviet attempts to maneuver their few defensive tanks and guns into position against this new threat were completely in vain, as they were quickly destroyed. Meanwhile, the 23rd Panzer Division was securing the right flank. By 1:35 p.m., they managed to capture Nebikov, destroying all Soviet units found there. Shortly before dusk, the division reached its objective for the day near Chilikovo and established contact with the motorcycle battalion of the 6th Panzer Division on its left. During the night, the division consolidated the positions it had taken and reorganized to continue the attack. The German attack surprised the Soviets. General Yeremenko, commander of the Soviet Stalingrad front, feared that the Hoth attack might threaten the rear of his 57th Army, which was holding the encirclement front south of Stalingrad. He warned Stalin that if this happened, it might be possible for the 6th Army to break through the 57th and escape the pocket. Stalin was not pleased and told Yeremenko in no uncertain terms to hold on, promising to send the 2nd Guards Army as reinforcements. By 20 o'clock hours, after a short rest, the tanks of the 6th Panzer Division were on the road again. The next objective, the northern branch of the Aksay River, 22 kilometers to the north. By the morning of December 13th, they had reached the river, after which they began to cross it. The 23rd Panzer Division, meanwhile, was attacked on its right flank, forcing it to take defensive positions. Similarly, late in the afternoon, the vanguard of the 6th Panzer Division was attacked by dozens of Soviet tanks. The Germans were eventually able to withstand the Soviet onslaught, destroying more than 60 enemy tanks and driving them into retreat. The next day, after much urging from Hitler, the 17th Panzer Division was sent into the attack and joined the 57th Panzer Corps. The 23rd Panzer Division, meanwhile, had spent the day fighting the growing enemy on its right flank and had not yet reached north of Aksay. If the Soviets could recapture Salivsky, its men would be cut off north of the river in a dangerous situation. Moreover, the aim of the day's fighting was not to seize and hold ground, but to wear down a numerically superior enemy, and that was certainly achieved. On the 14th of December, the 23rd Panzer Division regained momentum, capturing Samokin before noon and closing in on Krugliakov on the Aksay by mid-afternoon. In a bold move, a tank company turned south and, to complete surprise, captured the railway bridge over the Aksay intact. The most important event of the 15th occurred on the Chir front, where the long-held and potentially useful bridgehead over the Don River near Nizhne Chirskaya was lost. Without the bridgehead, the German units based there could not attack towards Stalingrad, and were therefore diverted south to join the attack of the 57th Panzer Corps. While the German units tried to break through to Stalingrad, the Soviets activated the second phase of the plan, known as Operation Little Saturn. Although the Soviet offensive was initially planned to be launched against Rostov, new developments made Stalin change his mind. Thus, instead of attacking southwest towards Rostov, the 2nd Guards Army would attack southeast and attack the rear of the Hoth relief attack. The new operation was launched early on the 16th of December from the northern reaches of the Don Bend, on either side of Boguchar, when the Soviet 6th Army, as well as the 2nd and 3rd Guards Armies, attacked Provisional Army Hollet and the Italian 8th Army. Despite their superiority, the Soviets made little progress on that first day. While this was taking place by the 17th, both the 23rd Panzer Division and the 6th Panzer Division continued to advance with the support of the Luftwaffe, which was able to destroy numerous Soviet armored vehicles. During the afternoon of that day, the Germans were able to continue advancing, although the enemy resistance they encountered increased. By the end of the day, the 17th Panzer Division was able to reach its positions and join the attack. By December 18th, the German advance was able to continue, and although Stalingrad was still a long way off, many expected the 6th Army troops to complete the remaining advance. However, by the 19th, Manstein was faced with another major problem. On the Army Group's northern flank, the situation of the neighboring Italian 8th Army had deteriorated on the second day of the Little Saturn attack. Shortly afterward, the Italians completely disintegrated, exposing the entire left wing of Hollett's Provisional Army. This meant that 3 Soviet armies were prepared to charge southeast, 40 to 45 kilometers behind Provisional Army Hollett's front lines on the Cher River, and crashed directly into the rear of the 57th Panzer Corps attack at the Mishkova. The German army group could be encircled or destroyed. At this point, Manstein saw what was coming. Although the Hoth attack came only 80 kilometers from the pocket, it had slowed to a halt, and with increasing Soviet resistance, it was unlikely that they could advance any further. On the other hand, reports from Stalingrad indicated that the besieged troops were increasingly depleted and could hardly be counted on. With this being the situation, Manstein knew he had to do something, and soon. The last remaining alternative was for Paulus's 6th Army to charge forward and reach the Hoth spearhead. Manstein was certain that if the 6th Army went all out on the attack, it could link up with the 4th Panzer Army. Such an action would lead to the abandonment of Stalingrad. Manstein intended that the 6th Army would launch in 2 phases. First, with the code words Winter Storm, the 6th Army would attack southwest to link up with the 57th Panzer Corps while holding the entire front around Stalingrad. In the second phase, the code word Thunder meant that Paulus would begin a gradual withdrawal from Stalingrad. Manstein believed that Hitler would accept the order Winter Storm because it was the only way for a supply convoy to get through. He also knew that Hitler would immediately rescind the evacuation order if it was issued too early. Thus, he would have to do so when a situation so critical was developing that Hitler could not deny it. At dawn on the 19th, Manstein sent his intelligence chief, Major Hans Eismann, to the stock exchange to explain his plan to Paulus. Meanwhile, the advance of the 6th, 17th, and 23rd Panzer Divisions was completely halted. Late that afternoon, Manstein sent an urgent message to Hitler. He told the German leader that he doubted that the 57th Panzer Corps' relief attack could reach the pocket. The main factor at the time was that the army group's left flank was in serious danger of collapse. The only solution, he said, would be for the 6th Army to attack southwest toward a link with the 57th Panzer Corps while simultaneously all the troops in the Caucasus withdrew. During the afternoon of the 19th, before receiving a reply from Hitler, Manstein contacted Paulus via a new high-frequency radio link that had just been installed. Paulus explained to him the various scenarios that Eismann had described and said that he now felt that the only viable alternative was a complete withdrawal from Stalingrad. Manstein asked when the 6th Army could be ready to move out and how much food and fuel it would need. Paulus replied that he could be ready in 3 or 4 days, and that he would need reduced rations for about 10 days and 1.5 times the normal amount of fuel. Based on this conversation, Manstein ordered the troops besieged in Stalingrad to begin preparing to break through the front, the action of which would begin in 3 or 4 days. On the front of the 57th Panzer Corps at Mishkova, the Soviet 2nd Guards Army completed its deployment during the evening of the 21st of December and prepared to attack the following morning. There were now 19.5 Soviet divisions with 149,000 men and over 600 tanks deployed against the 57th Panzer Corps, which numbered only 85. General Zeitzler, the Army Chief of Staff, had always agreed with Manstein on the need for the 6th Army to abandon Stalingrad, and by the 22nd, he believed he had obtained Hitler's consent. Discussing the matter, Hitler finally said, Very well. Then compose a message to Paulus asking him how far he can go if he is ordered to escape. A relieved Zeitzler composed the message to Paulus immediately. Paulus replied, 30 kilometers at most. On the 23rd, Manstein called Hitler at his headquarters in Rastenburg in a last desperate attempt to get permission for Paulus to leave Stalingrad. After Manstein made his impassioned plea, Hitler replied, I don't understand what you mean. Paulus only has enough petrol for 30 kilometers at most. He himself says he cannot escape at the moment. Frustrated, Manstein felt that his last chance to rescue the Sixth Army was slipping away, but he could wait no longer. Manstein had to act to save his army group, not to mention Army Group A in the Caucasus. It was then that Manstein began to call one by one all the corps and division generals under his command and gave them the order to retreat towards Rostov. Paulus and his men were then left to their own devices. In a final call between Manstein and Paulus, Paulus again indicated that he had no petrol to act. In the end, both Manstein and Paulus refused to go against Hitler's wishes to evacuate Stalingrad, and both used the fuel situation as an excuse for not acting. Perhaps if they had had the slightest idea that in 10 years, only 5% of the rank and file who were taken prisoner at Stalingrad would still be alive to return to Germany, they might have acted differently. The garrison eventually fell in early February 1943, and on the other hand, Manstein was able to secure the situation on the southeastern front in early March after his famous Kharkov counteroffensive. So, what do you think about this rescue operation?